ang question mo, Orion, did the turmoil spread out to the countryside? Chito.
Okay. It spread out throughout the country, but mainly in the urban centers. The weakness of the student movement, the Tienanmen demonstrations, was that they were able to get the support of the urban population,
But not the rural.
but they did not. They
But-
were just starting to
But
reach out to the rural
isn't that
areas.
usually the case? The peasantry really, even
Not in
in
the case of Mao.
even Mao spent his whole life with the
With the
peasantry.
peasant. He was a
But-
peasant.
But even
The students were not.
but
they
even
could
in
not
EDSA Uno, the peasantry, and in the election of '86, the peasantry still voted for Marcos and gave debatable, but some objective analysts would say that Marcos still won by a few 100,000 votes because of the rural vote.
The rural votes, yeah.
It was again Cebu,
So
Manila that were in the heat of the protest. Yeah.
In the case of the Tiananmen demonstrations, this was the weak point, why they could be suppressed so easily. They were not able to establish linkages with the rural population. And also because Deng Xiaoping and his rural reforms were successful. It was in the urban reforms that he was having problems. That's why inflation and corruption was really urban phenomenon. No? And the students, they were in the urban areas. So what Deng Xiaoping then goes to do is try to gain legitimacy after crashing the demonstration by being able to, first power the economy, achieve hyper-speed growth, and then try to lift up, I mean, he succeeded. Hundreds of millions of farmers and rural people in the rural areas.
Hiro, anything
who
to
were
add?
able
Yeah.
to
Let
become
me
prosperous.
say something also about the Chinese model for development. One of the things that the Chinese learned from the Japanese, basically, I believe from learning the history of the Meiji dynasty, was that catching up to knowledge was critical. They sent the young,
You mean the Chinese or Japanese?
the Chinese sent
Okay.
their young to American universities. They sent them to European universities to learn administration, management, finance. There was this deep hunger to learn technology. I mean, it is unbelievable that in a span of 20 years, I remember Fidel Ramos boasting in 1992-93 that the Philippines was a newly industrializing country, a tiger. And here was China just saying to get wealthy is glorious. And they did that basically by admitting to their counterparts in Hong Kong that they had this hunger to learn processes, technological processes in manufacturing, etc. Before WTO, it was economic policy in China. You come in, bring your technology, share it with us. And all of this.
If I may, Hiro, I think you being a finance man would appreciate this. From my readings, one of the crucial lessons that Deng learned from the Hong Kong finance people is he was asking the Hong Kong people, where do we get the capital? And the Hong Kong consultants were surprised. You have land. And the communists, of course, as usual, the communists and socialists don't understand finance. How you can convert land into capital. And that was one of the basic, and I think very little discussed aspect of the Chinese miracle. They learned how to capitalize with what they had, a lot of land. And because land is owned by the state was the richest factor in the economic scenario. Unlike in the Philippines, the state is pobre. Walang resources ang state. Lahat na kay Manny Pangilinan at Ayala, Lopez et al. Di ba? Na ayaw naman ipasok yan sa bagong power plants in the country. They put it in Singapore and so on.
Let's go back to the Chinese experience. The Chinese were witness to the financial crisis during the 80s, where the U.S. again imposed its will on Japan, Germany, and the rest of the European community in the Plaza Accords,
and so on.
the Rome Accords. And then it forced the Japanese basically to invest in Thailand, Indonesia, and all to
and in New York
bypass,
properties and so on.
etc.
Yeah.
Now, Ronald Reagan basically imposed quotas on Japanese cars and semiconductor chips. And he initiated a new arms race,
Yeah.
basically
Star
based
Wars,
on this new technology. Okay? The new technology was just taking hold. The internet, semicon chips, etc., etc., etc. Okay? And it was taking hold at the same time the West was pushing for globalization. And this is where Deng's opening basically met the opening of the West, forcing emerging markets, open your markets, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, but the crucial question then, Hiro, is how come China was successful and the others are not? My thesis is that because China held on to the capital, the state held on to the capital and could direct the capital to what was needed by the world market. Chito,
And there's
we'll get back to you, Hiro, if you want to add.
2 points. One, you mentioned what Deng Xiaoping learned from the Hong Kong, and he learned one important thing. China then was isolated after the Tienanmen crackdown, but it needed capital. It was able to mobilize the rich overseas Chinese.
That's right, yeah, yeah.
From Hong Kong, Singapore,
Exactly.
all over the world. And that actually was the initial stock of capital
Surge.
they were able to use.
Yeah, yeah.
Until China eventually opened the market and became now a magnet for the Western corporations to come
Correct,
back
yeah.
because of the big
So,
market. That's
yeah.
the source of
So the capital of the overseas Chinese,
became. Just like
collateralized by land leases, I suppose. There's some
Again,
collateral, no?
they were given,
Or
you
tax
have to
outright.
understand that the export-led model for Singapore, Indonesia, the whole bunch of them, essentially China says, okay, this is what you're doing, we'll give you cheaper land, cheaper
That's
credit,
right, yeah, yeah.
cheaper labor. Come.
Okay, cheaper credit was possible because the state ran the financial
Again,
system.
you had a policy of centralized planning. Okay, export-led, you want to produce this, no problem, we'll help you produce it, and we will even create the industries to provide the linkages for
Well,
you.
what
et cetera,
I
et cetera, et
recall
cetera.
when I visited relatives and so on, they have an idea, they want to produce something, the state sets up the physical structure, and you just go in, enter, and start producing goods.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
exactly.
Eh dito, magtatayo ka ng industriya. Saan ka maghahanap ng kapital, etc.
Wait, you have to
Gusto mong
understand.
magtrabaho, hindi ka naman makakakuha ng kapital. Farmers do not have capital
Again,
here, do not have loans.
you're looking at a functioning state
But
bureaucracy.
we go back to our first and second part, no? You have to accumulate capital, consolidate it under an entity that is not self-interested, which is the state. Eh kung ibigay mo kay Manny Pangilinan yan o kay Ramon Ang, wala kang pag-asa umutang doon.
No, it's not him. It's still the Chinese, overseas Chinese, his boss. Okay.
Doon sa China.
No,
Si
in
Ramon
Hong
Ang?
Kong. In Hong Kong.
Si Ramon Ang?
No,
No, in Hong Kong.
it's Salim.
Si Salim.
Okay, come on.
Anyway,
let's-
that's another matter.
But there's a second lesson
sige.
in terms of the finance and economy. The Chinese tried to learn in trekking this path of socialist market economy. They wanted to learn what they could from the West, and that's why they sent students outside.
That's right.
They learned. They sent all sorts of delegation. But there was one big thing they held on to. They kept the capital account closed.
Yeah.
Exchange rate.
Oo.
They controlled it for a long
Correct.
time. So their exports were priced
Cheaper.
and then, of course, they came under pressure from the West eventually.
Of course,
But that's what saved them from the financial crisis
Yeah.
of 1998. That's what saved
In
them
1994.
from the 2008
They,
global
they
financial
devalued
crisis.
in 1994,
Only, yeah.
and they kept the closed capital account, and that is sacred. Okay, they will not allow, basically,
But that is also the reason why they cannot internationalize the yuan.
No,
Exactly.
now there is pressure.
there is
Because
pressure
they
to
want now the yuan to be an international currency.
But
you cannot do that unless
less you
open.
liberal,
Precisely.
and the state's
Okay,
participation.
the discussion
basically
is being dominated by the seniors. Let's go to Orion. Orion, any reaction? Any?
Doon sa doon sa pagiging dominate sa pagiging dominante ng currency ng China. Talagang magiging posible nga lang siya talaga if they
Control.
if they parang integrated do sa parang further liberalization. Pero I think sir parang doon sa pag ginawa nga nila yun, parang yung parang lessons from the revolution hanggang do sa time nga nung ni Deng, parang nawala rin siya agad, kumbaga. Parang they went back to the start na, yun, exploiters exploiting the exploited, parang ganun.
Okay, what's your... you mean the present system is still exploitative of the people? Chito?
I don't think the Chinese will deny that there is still exploitation because there's still capital and there's still a capital-labor relations. They speak of the initial stage of socialism. This derives from, it goes back to Lenin, yung new economic policy na you need to use elements of capitalism to be able to mobilize the economy until a certain level of prosperity. Ang problema is at what level kasi
Who will
30
decide?
years na 30 years na. Pero Deng's economic strategy, which was successful in achieving what they have achieved so far, has now reached the limit. They have to come up with a new strategy. Hindi na ubra yung parang exports kasi wala nang bibili sa West, no? They have a problem. And second, hindi din pwedeng parang investment because you can only build so many airports. So now you have to improve the wages, the living standards,
Well,
rural,
they're developing the domestic market. No? Domestic
So yun ang takbo ngayon ng bagong
Well,
leadership.
ang Pilipinas may consumption economy, pero walang production. Therefore, you
Yun
drain
ang
your
problema.
economy. You have to
I
buy from
think-
the outside.
Tong, you have to separate the Philippine scenario from China's scenario. China is an old
Okay,
civilization.
what's the basic difference between the two?
Essentially, China has had statehood for thousands of years. You had a functioning state, whether good or bad, but it
Eh,
existed.
dito may statehood din, US statehood.
Come on,
We have last 5 minutes.
you
Let's
cannot
devote the
put-
last 5 minutes to the discussion on lessons the Philippines can learn from the experience of China and Tienanmen. Number 1, kung si Marcos di bumagsak at siya nag-resign na dahil tumanda na, may lupus and so on, and the state survived.
It wasn't a state. It was a personality. It was a family.
So even at that time, we did not have a state. In other words, nothing good could have happened either way.
It's very difficult. Polls apart, yung Marcos leadership and Deng Xiaoping's leadership.
It's
One is
completely.
enlightened and one
One is you know,
not enlightened, or it has already reached the peak, no, and it was already in decline.
Now, is the lack of enlightenment of the Marcos regime because of Marcos or because there was no party apparatus with an ideological basis and so on?
Ay, lahat na yon.
Lahat na yun. Ikaw, Hiro.
It's
combined.
Communist Party.
You don't have.
So kailangan mo talaga partido. Now, yung Liberal Party, Nationalista Party
It
ngayon,
doesn't have to be a communist party, but what you have is a group of like-minded people
Correct.
with a far-sighted view. Ang nangyari kay Deng Xiaoping, lahat sila nung kanyang group of leaders, lahat yan under Mao, they were sent to the rural areas and they engaged in hard labor. They saw the poverty. So they were determined
Now,
to overcome that, and
No.
they were focused
some people
on
will say,
economic.
that's because the Filipino people is underdeveloped, ideological and so. That is never true. I don't think it's the people. I think it's the intelligentsia, di ba? The pool of intellectuals that you have. Ang problema, as I said in a discussion we had with Chito and a group of people, ang Philippine intelligentsia is so myopic, so underdeveloped, so uncommitted to principles. Think tanks are eating out of the hands of foreign funders and so on. Di ba? Yan ang problema natin. So we have last 2-3 minutes. Ano bang problema natin? Ako sinasabi ko, intellectual class natin, walang pag-asa. Ayaw mag-commit to a program, a set of ideas na matatag.
This is going to take a long time. Pero
We have 3 minutes.
to reduce it, we get paralyzed by too much analysis and too much debate. Walang unanimity and political will to continue.
Okay, we'll go to Hiro and then to Orion. Hiro.
I say that, unfortunately, the political system doesn't lead to substantive change. I mean, it is a wreckage, okay? The economic system is held in control, basically.
I'll go to Orion. Orion, ang ideological forces in the country are also divided. Reaffirm, rejectionist, rejectionist na maka-US, rejectionist na nasa gitna, On the right naman, yun, nagkakasundo siguro lahat ng mga kapitalista, basta't pagsamantalahan ng yaman ng bayan. Orion, anong tingin mo from your perspective?
Sa tingin ko, sir, parang tama na may mga nauna na sabi na yun nga dito sa country natin parang pero doon sa part on the analysis of intellectuals, parang hindi na siya doon limited. Parang nandun din siyempre yung sa system na parang hindi naman siya talaga nagsiserve nga doon sa mga tao. Nag-serve siya sa iilan kumbaga. Tapos doon sa system na yun, nagpo-propagate rin siya ng ng tawag doon ng elite rule kumbaga. So, parang mas nandun yung problema talaga.
Okay.
If you don't
Yung
change
elite
it, diba?
is the ruling class. In one of our discussions sa Diliman Book Club, yung pinag-usapan natin, ruling class mga problema. If your ruling class are the financial oligarchs na walang iniisip kundi yung tubo nila, wala kang panalo, di ba? We have a minute or so. Anything to add? Yeah.
If we could combine Tang's economic reforms with the Philippine democratic system, that would be the ideal, but it's utopian. For our democracy, we pay the price in terms of economic development. For China's economic development, they pay the price in terms of democracy, freedom of speech. There's the option how to
Marry the two.
We
how
go back to...
find a good combination. Is the challenge.
Tatanungin natin ng TV crew natin. Saan kayo boto? Dictatorship na may economic progress o eleksyon na lumalala ang buhay ng mga taong bayan? Sa una siya. Economic, dalawa na. Economic din, tatlo. Ay talo tayong mga intellectual.
Panalo si Deng Xiaoping.
Panalo si Deng Xiaoping. And I think that is really
and that is the appeal of Teng's reforms to the ordinary Chinese. That's why the Chinese Communist Party is able to maintain itself in power, despite the fact that communism has fallen, or socialism has fallen in the other regimes.
Okay, we have 30 seconds.
I mean, it's the same in the West. Okay. Capitalism fell. And they had to institute so-called socialist measures, basically, of government intervention. And that is what led to basically the rise of labor and the middle class. They called it socialist measures.
I have something to add, but I'll give that to the youngest member of the panel.
Parang dito naman sir sa discussion, parang may na-left out tayo na part, yung about nga doon sa dun, 'di ba, lessons of the Tienanmen Square, 'di ba? Parang we left out yung sa lessons naman na makukuha ng mga student movements.
Oh, sige, go ahead.
Kasi parang doon sa doon sa lesson nga doon sa nangyari doon, parang na-prove nga na hindi kaya mismo ng students themselves if they want to change the system, hindi nila kayang gawin yan kung sila lang.
Nandun ang thumbs down natin. Tapos ng oras natin. Maraming salamat po and let's keep studying and thinking dahil doon naman nagsisimula lahat.
I think the whole student thing uprising was a result of basically government reforms.
So, ironic.
It's ironic.
Ironic.
It was the government that essentially initiated it.
Sige.
It was the state.
Pwede na kayong magsara habang nagdidiskusyon.
It wasn't...